Hello and welcome to a brand new Arseblog Arsecast right here on arseblog.com. How are you? Hope you're well. Thank you very much indeed, as always, for being here. It is an interlull episode of the Arsecast, but fear not, we have got stuff for you to listen to. A little later on, I will be talking to author and Arsenal fan Jon Spurling about his new book. It's called Go to War, Football on the Brink in the 1980s, which takes a look back at, I'll give you a guess, see if you can guess. That's right. It's football in the 1980s and some of the many challenges that the game and society had to contend with back then, but there were things to enjoy as well about the game and about the way it developed over the course of that decade. So we'll talk to Jon a bit later on. We'll also give you a chance to win a couple of copies. Well, one copy. We've got a couple of copies of the book to give away, which means, of course, a couple of winners. Not one winner to get two books. That would be silly. We wouldn't do that. Now, though, to talk a bit about Arsenal, to talk a bit about what's going on and not going on in this international break, delighted to welcome back. It's Clive Palmer. Hello, Clive.
Hello, Andrew. How are you?
I'm all right, thank you very much. How are you enjoying this interlull so far? What do you make of Harry Kane's comments, by the way?
About straight in. I thought we gave a little gentle chat. Now you made me put my long studs in straight away.
Absolutely. Steel studs.
You're clever first question, Andrew. I think I don't think they're good comments at all. When did he promote himself to be manager spokesman? You know?
Yeah.
I just want to think back to the amount of tournaments he has played in, injured, selfishly, making sure other people can't get on the pitch. And, putting himself first, right? He has to remember that some of these players were assessed by the England medical staff and sent away. And he has to remember he's going to need these very same players to pass him the football, Andrew. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
When he's trundling into the box, he might fancy one of them to pass to him. I'll tell you what I'll be doing. I'll do a double step over and shoot into the car park and then say, sorry, mate.
Yeah.
You know, you're not getting it. You're not getting it. And it's not a very smart comment, almost as if he was set up, but very nice comments to some of our media that actually want that meat for which they can hold on to for a couple of days.
It's a weird situation, obviously, because if people don't know what he said, it's a shame this week about the withdrawals. It's a tough period of the season. Maybe that's taken advantage of a little bit. I don't really like it, if I'm honest, totally honest, he said. England comes before anything and any club situation, which I think, you know, there'll be some people who go, yeah, but, you know, let's be real about this. That's not how it works or not how it should work. Not for England, not for any country. If a player, as we saw with Martin Odegaard, you know, Norway probably could have, if they'd really wanted to, said, right, you're going to play for us. But common sense approach applied there where he went, you know, maybe that wasn't the most common sense. Could they have come to that conclusion over the phone? They probably could have. Nevertheless, he's the captain. He went, they assessed him, they decided together this was not the right way for him to continue his rehabilitation because Norway will need him in the future. Arsenal need him after this international break, and he's not going to play for Norway, and that's perfectly fine. And I think when you're looking at players, and this is very tacit criticism of, let's say, someone like Declan Rice, someone like Bukayo Saka, two players who have made themselves unbelievably available for England over the years and played through, I think, you know, injuries and you know, aches and strains and niggles, and we'll come to that and how that applies to players more generally. I think when you say what he said, you are sort of casting aspersions on them as if somehow they're not really injured. And even if they're not really, really injured, players like Saka and like Rice, who've given so much to England over the last number of years, gone all the way to the final of Euros and been really, really dedicated to their countries, you know, you have to acknowledge that, hey, maybe they deserve, in this crazy football schedule world we live in, maybe they deserve a couple of weeks off, and maybe down the line it'll be beneficial for England for them to have had that couple of weeks off.
Yeah, that's far too sensible, Andrew. Behave yourself, mate. That's far too sensible. I think it's there are a number of players that didn't finish their games at the weekend. I mean, Trent Alexander-Arnold, injured. He's proper injured.
Yeah.
You know, Saka and Rice came off the pitch. There are other players that did finish the game. And I'm not sure which ones got assessed, and I'm not really looking to cast aspersions over people. It's up to them. But if I'm a Man City fan, for example, Kyle Walker's 34 years of age, playing again for England in the break, I'll be worried about that, and so yeah, it's a challenge. Look, we're on our third international break this season, and we're only at 11 games into the Premier League. There's your problem right there.
Yeah.
There's your problem. And people are having to manage around it. So while Harry Kane is tucked up in Marbella for his 2-week winter break that he gets in the Bundesliga, by the way, that all of these players do not get. Yeah, I wonder how he feels then when he's pictured in the crowd watching games. Other people are playing 3 games a week over that Christmas period.
Yeah,
he has to have a more holistic view. For somebody in a senior role, he needs to think broader. And he needs to think about his own career, Andrew. If he'd have had the sense to have a release clause in his contract, he might be playing for Manchester City today with a Champions League in his back pocket, with a league medal in his back pocket, and maybe he'll be a bit more sympathetic to the volume of high-level football matches he's having to play.
Sure.
Right? So yeah, I'm not a fan of that comment, in case you didn't realise it.
Yeah,
I'm not a fan of that comment. Very poor. Very poor.
I mean, I did find it quite funny that sections of the media were pinning this somehow on Thomas Tuchel, as if this was his influence. Oh, Gareth Southgate never had these kinds of withdrawals. But, sometimes shit just happens. It doesn't have anything to do with it. It's not like Thomas Tuchel is behind the scenes, calling up these players and saying, yeah, drop out, give Lee Carsley a problem. That guy, it's just so absurd to think that because England have appointed a German manager, all of a sudden the England players are like, yeah, I don't really care anymore. It's just such nonsense, isn't it?
You're a wise man, Andrew. You know what this is. This is positioning. They didn't fancy Tuchel in the job in the first place, some of the media. They wanted an English manager in charge, and they're positioning themselves already, for him. They're getting ready to be far tougher on him than they were on darts playing Gareth. Do you see what I mean? And that's the truth. And they're ready. They're getting ready for him. And he won't be tied to him if he doesn't win every game 2-0. And because they're going to be ready and waiting. So this is all part of the positioning going forward.
Anyway, the good news is that Saka and Rice will have the international break off. And, it's just so typical of this season, isn't it, that we're looking at the players and we're worried about the players who are gone on international duty, whether it's Kai Havertz or William Saliba. The Spanish guys are gone off. There's 10 players gone on international duty, and we're like biting our nails. Yeah. And then we get slapped with an injury story about a player who hasn't gone, and that's Ben White, and he is set to be sidelined for 6 to 8 weeks, depending on which reporting you believe, but that seems to be the consensus, 6 or 8 weeks after knee surgery. Obviously not good news, and in the context of this season in general, it just feels like, not again. Another thing that we have to deal with. And maybe we'll get into the nuts and bolts of, why it's happened now, et cetera, but it feels like we keep hearing about the letter of the law this season. It feels like the law is Murphy's Law, where anything that can go wrong for Arsenal will go wrong. And this is another example of that.
Yeah, I mean, for keen watchers of Ben White, which, Andrew, I'd say me and you both are, we've seen him many times. And one of his key strengths is his athleticism, his movement, his ability to go up and down that line, be in the front six and to be in the midfield too, and also be back in the back line as well. And he played centre-half fantastic well against Liverpool. But for those on bandage watch, we've seen that bandage on that knee for quite a long time. Yeah. And so we knew there was a problem there. And also, that just generally, when I go to games, Andrew, I tend to watch warm-up sometimes, and watching him do his work is just like, wow. And then when they sprint off into the tunnel, I look at him and think, gee whiz, you are absolutely elite. And he has not been running like that in the games. He's just been supportive, standing in his space. He's barely been overlapping and charging past people. And that told me a long time ago he was carrying something. So I think I'm so pleased he's getting this work done. Because before you know it, people who are not so keen watchers of him will be having him out the team. So he's not a good player. We want this player to play, that player to play. When really we should be looking at the repeated injuries of Tomiyasu, who has not been able to take minutes from him which has probably exacerbated the situation and made them delay this operation. This operation could have been done way before this, but we just cannot rely on Tomiyasu. So now we have Timber and hopefully returning Calafiori. We have Zinchenko in the building again. We have a young kid in Miles Lewis Skelly that can take minutes in a full-back space. I think the club have decided, this is the time to do it. And hopefully he's back sooner. But he deserves this. He deserves to be charged fully fit.
Oh, 100%, because, you look at Arsenal this season and that discussion about have we been as good as we want to be or could be, is one that, I've had, you've had, and lots of people will have in the pubs after the games. There are myriad reasons as to why I don't think we've been at our best this season. But, when we break it down into its individual components, sometimes you look at a player and you say, is he 100%? Is he really in his best form? What's wrong with him? Has he passed his best? And there are all these kinds of discussions. But what we don't know, and we can only surmise from snippets of information that we get, and like you say, bandage watch, and then how a player plays. I think what's been missing from Ben White's game this season probably is that dynamism, that ability to, as you said, get up and down the line, contribute, go forward, overlap. I looked at the Chelsea game the other day, and it was never more stark to me that Ben White was playing within himself. Because he has to. There's no other choice for him to get through 90 minutes. When Arteta said after the Chelsea game, we've got players out there who are really struggling. We've got players who can't play for 90 minutes, but who we need to play for 90 minutes. Ben White was the perfect example of that. He played in a way which allowed him to get through 90 minutes, to do his job defensively. It maybe cost us a little something in the opposition final third because we don't have what he gives us, particularly in that triangle with Odegaard and Saka. But the only way he can do that is to sort of inhibit his natural game because he's been, impacted by this injury.
Yep, names on T-sheet, one of my lines, they give you comfort, but then look at the health of them. And are they really there? I mean, Gabriel took a knock in Liverpool game. First game back, he wasn't quite himself, but he got through it, and he's got better since. Saliba had a rough international break. And he hasn't really been himself, but he's getting through games, and hopefully he started to look really good in the last game against Chelsea. You have vagaries of form, and it's hard for us to accept because we have these ambitions, expectations, and people like Saliba and Ben White losing form, Ben White being injured, wasn't in my pre-season calculations because Ben White always plays. Yeah. Saliba always plays well. Doesn't get sent off. He barely gets booked. He gets sent off. We lose him for a game. Liverpool at home. Crikey. Then Gabriel goes down. Gabriel's a warrior. He never goes down. He goes down. So I think it's really hard to adjust your mindset and adjust your expectations. And then, of course, you can ask yourself, do these things actually, have they happened? And then I can hear people shouting down the phone now saying, but these are excuses, Clive, we need to be better. I need to get. But they have actually happened to key people at key times. I just can't turn away from it. If you're looking, we're not at full power. But hopefully we will be in the next couple of weeks.
No, I don't think you can look at reasons for things and then say they're excuses. If you're trying to analyze a football club or a football team or its performances and it's, they're not what you want them to be, you can just say, well, that's not good enough. We need to be better. But if you don't ask why, if you don't try and understand why, then you get nowhere, right? So this idea that because you're looking for explanations means you're also seeking excuses or making excuses doesn't add up for me. I mean, Rice, who we talked about earlier, Declan Rice has not looked like Declan Rice at all this season. And I can't get beyond the idea that there's an element of fatigue / exhaustion, an injury that he might be carrying. Clearly, he couldn't finish the game against Chelsea the other day. He's not a guy who comes off. Very, very rare. What's like the second or third time ever in his Arsenal career that he's been substituted. So he's a guy who plays 95 minutes, 98 minutes every single week, And I think these are things that we have to take into account when we try and analyze performances and to put it in a slightly different direction, to think about how we can improve, to think about how we can get better and how we need to get better, you have to have all that information when you're trying to make that analysis.
Absolutely. Just health and fitness. You can see it in, the goal that we conceded at the weekend, the Chelsea goal. And if you ever want to see when players are fatigued in that goal, you could see it. When the ball goes out on the second phase free kick, Timber normally goes out there, but he couldn't get out there quick enough. So he let Saliba do his work for him because he was fitter. So I'll stay narrow. So to cover Saliba, Rice and Partey decided, well, we'll drop into the back line, which is what one of our principles are. Rice is normally on the left-hand side, found himself on the right-hand side, Partey inside, both doing half a job, not really doing a job, just standing in space. And of course, when you're not quite at it and a bit fatigued, you don't press out quickly enough. And they get the shot bottom corner 1-1. It's like, how do you explain that? So people are saying, you haven't got an injury crisis. But we know Tim was on the back of an ACL that's struggling to finish games for over a year, because this season, sorry. And so I can see him lagging a little bit on that side. So it's a challenge, isn't it? And it's not an excuse. He's just looking at the screen and saying to myself, we're not quite there at the moment. But also the last phase of that game, I really felt we did start to show some spring and did start to show some appetite and offensive desire to really get that second goal. And I walked away thinking, there you are, Arsenal, there you are. Okay, let's get some health and fitness into you, and I think we'll be better, Andrew, going forward.
Yeah, the chemistry that Mikel Arteta often refers to is an interesting thing to consider. Mikel Merino probably had his best 20 minutes in an Arsenal shirt. I thought he was good, really good in the first half against Liverpool, by the way. But I thought this 20 minutes gave us something that we hadn't necessarily seen from him before, and that ability to connect with not just Martin Odegaard, who he knows, but players outside him down the left-hand side, whether it's Trossard or Martinelli, I think was encouraging. And maybe, when we think about ways that we're going to be able to get better and how we are going to be able to improve, it might be a case that you have to lean on some players who I think, even he's had some fitness issues because of the injury he picked up. He didn't have much of a preseason. On the flip side of that, though, you could say he's relatively fresh. Hasn't got a lot of minutes under his belt, whereas I think someone like Rice or someone like Ben White, who even though they tried to manage him through the season with certain games here and there, has played quite a lot of minutes. So we might have to lean into some guys who haven't played as much.
Yeah, I think so. But I'm absolutely fine with it, actually. Because you get something, you get some freshness and juice from these players, I know it's only Preston, but I thought Zinchenko was really good in that game. It reminded me of what he can do. Do I want him playing in the biggest games at the moment? I'm not so sure. But there are other games when he can be really, really valuable. Same for Tomiyasu. I just want to see the full power come back, right? And I suppose, Andrew, we're quite seasoned watchers here, and we think. I get surprised when I learn something so drastically new. And to see Odegaard come on the pitch, I'm thinking, well, I've seen Arsenal loads of times without Odegaard. But boy, did we see something else when he came on that pitch. And it was a reminder, not just how much I missed him, but his teammates missed him. And everyone looks better. And I think having more of those sort of experienced players that know what we're trying to achieve and keep us honest, keep people up, keep the spaces closed, will get us closer to being who we are, and there may be a couple of people that we may not be using quite enough of, shall we say, to add some of that leadership when Odegaard was out. I've often felt that when Odegaard's out, Jorginho should take some time on the pitch. I think he brings a lot of that leadership characteristics. Again, I'm not saying he should start every game. I just feel he should be on the pitch for the crucial moments when people maybe start to doubt themselves, So, but hey, look, we all got our favourites and preferences. That's just where my head is.
Sure, no, I agree. I think there is certainly scope for a little more experience here and there. I also think, you can point to players like Zinchenko and like Gabriel Jesus as very experienced players who haven't quite been at the level that we would like. And, as we sort of turn our attention further forward and think about how are we going to be more potent, how are we going to be more efficient in the final third, you can't help but think of someone like Jesus, and you can't help but think of what he could and should be bringing to this Arsenal team, but isn't at the moment. And look, I've spoken about this, and I think the knee injury at the World Cup has been the catalyst for a decline, which I can't say 100% is irreversible, but I don't feel confident in Gabriel Jesus when he comes onto the pitch anymore. Yeah. I don't feel like he is going to give us something, whether it's a burst through the lines, a final pass, a shot on goal, a goal, an assist. None of those things are in my mind now when I think of Gabriel Jesus. It's just him sitting lonely in a meadow somewhere, contemplating life and wondering, what the fuck, why can't I do any of this anymore? That's the vision that I have of him. How does he change it? How can he change it? He spoke about how he still believes in himself. He talked about how he's not necessarily getting as many minutes as he would like to deliver what he feels like he can still deliver. But you're in that catch-22 situation, aren't you, where if you don't score, if you don't assist, the manager's faith in you doing that diminishes, and your minutes diminish alongside of that.
Yeah, he's gone through a journey this season, hasn't he? And we were fortunate enough to see him pre-season, weren't we? And he looked really, really sharp. Live, right close up to the pitch, we could see him. I thought, this is interesting. He's going to have a real good contribution this season. And even initially, when he wasn't playing, he was coming on and looking quite sharp. Mm. But against Chelsea, I felt he didn't look sharp. He didn't look sharp and motivated. I'm a bit harsh on him at the moment. I don't mean to be, but when I look at it from, outside, he's 27 years of age. He's won the Premier League 4 times. He's one of our captains and leaders of the team. He literally is one of our captains. And one of our captains should be stepping up when our captain is not there. Mm-hmm. And I think he's not quite stepping up, or he's not quite emotionally grasping what he should be doing. And the core parts of his game for me, Andrew, is he gets the ball and he can hold the ball. He can keep the ball. He can manipulate people, move people around, and then the ball comes away out from him and we can move. He's not holding the ball. He's not easily found. And he's not scoring. And I don't think he's assisted much. So we have a problem, don't we? We have a senior player that's experienced, that we've invested in, that we pay well, and he's not here. He's disconnected from the group. So we do have a problem. And these are one of the measures that we need to realise, that people are looking at us and they're saying, okay, you should be doing better. And he's one of the core reasons for it. I don't look at other players so quickly. People are looking for a 17-year-old to play. They're looking at, is Jesus trusted? But what I do know, that we spent 45 million English pounds on this guy, Gabriel Jesus, to play. We gave him a number 9 shirt, and he's not playing. We all go through bad form, so that's clear. We don't play well every single week, but this is the moment right now. Yeah. My amateur psychologist piece says, when I look at him, he looks disconnected, and he seems like an emotional person, and I worry about that.
So when a player maybe goes through what Jesus is going through at the moment, the first thing people say is, well, he's done, he's washed, it's over. Arsenal need to move on. And I get that. I think that's a natural response as a football fan, where when a player doesn't deliver over an extended period of time, you have to think about how you replace him, and you have to think about what you can add to your squad in place of a guy like that. At the same time, though, we don't quite know what's available in the January market, who is available in the January market. We don't know what Arsenal are capable of doing in the January market either. I think there should be money to spend, but, I don't know for sure that we haven't had any war chest stories yet anyway, so let's put it like that. We haven't heard about Arsenal's war chest, so we don't know. That information is not in the public domain. So how important is it for a manager like Mikel Arteta to at least turn that situation around? I'm speaking about it from a managerial, a coaching point of view, where I think long term, it's very difficult to say that Gabriel Jesus is the guy for Arsenal. But right now, Gabriel Jesus is the guy that Arsenal have got.
Yeah.
So it's incumbent on the manager, the coaching staff, to get more out of him. That is another one of the challenges of management, isn't it? It's not just about, well, he's had chances, let's discard him until such time as we can bring somebody else in. It is about ensuring that you get as much as possible out of every single player in your squad. And he feels, to me anyway, because of a slight shortage, if you like, in that forward three or in that front line, where I think a lot of people would say Arsenal needs something else. Arsenal needs something new in that forward line. But until such time as we have it, it's important that we use everybody that we've got and try and get a tune out of every single player who's in that squad. But first and foremost, I think Jesus is the one for me where you could say the bar has been lowered significantly. It's not impossible for that bar to be raised a little bit higher until such time as we decide to have the conversation, shake hands, give him a carriage clock, and off we go.
Yeah, I think in his 2-week break, he'd be definitely coming into my office for a one-to-one if I was a manager to have a talk to him, because the team behind the team is really important. And the effect it has on the guy that's holding the role in Kai Havertz is, Andrew, he looks overplayed, doesn't he? He looks tired. He's on the edge of an injury himself. He had the last international break he had off when he came back first game. Obviously, he hadn't trained. I think and he didn't look great in that first game. And he's just getting back to patches of form. But he wasn't the guy that was knocking people over like bowling pins at the start of the year this year, because he looks fatigued after Euros. He looks fatigued like many players do, like Rice does, for example. And so one of the key things we have Gabriel Jesus, who didn't go away in the summer, who hasn't had a load of minutes and should be fresh and sharp. And he's not managing to convince anyone that he should be starting and playing. And so I look around the league and I look around Liverpool's backups behind their forwards. They're all engaged and all producing. I look at Man City. They don't have a Jesus or an Alvarez. So they're running a huge risk. We do have a Jesus. Yeah. Come on, mate. We need you. We really need you to find your spark again, to find your role in the team and build your basics of your game up again. Because he has some extraordinary one-on-one ability, and he just looks a bit lost. And I can't explain it. But then again, sometimes with form, you can't explain when it goes. And when it all comes back, he starts to just spring in and step in again. You go, okay, there you are. And then,
where did that come from?
Yeah, and it can come back very, very quickly, and we can all see it when it does. So I'm holding out hope that he re-finds his love for Arsenal again, playing football. I do think he's that sort of character. He needs to be happy. He needs to love it. He needs to feel valued, and then we start to see him again.
I mean, I know I'm looking a little bit ahead here, but when we do return from that international break, where Trossard is away, Martinelli is away, Havertz is away, and I think certainly Havertz and Martinelli, or Trossard rather, are likely to play quite a lot. I'm not so sure about Martinelli, but he's got a bit of distance, a bit of travelling to do. If you are Mikel Arteta and you're looking at the fixture list and your first game back is Nottingham Forest at home, and I know Forest have been going great guns. Yeah. They've been playing very well and are high up the table, so fair play to them. But if you are Mikel Arteta and you're thinking about the schedule that's upcoming after those games, where you've got Champions League games, you've got cup games, and you've got a lot going on, when you're making your plans for that Nottingham Forest game, is like a 10 days of intense training with Gabriel Jesus, does that give you the opportunity, for example, to play a player who is relatively, in inverted commas, fresh from the start? He doesn't have to go traveling. He doesn't have to go intense competitive training for his national country. He isn't playing 2 games, 90 minutes, one home, one away, who knows what kind of pitches, etc., that they're on. That if you're making those plans in order to sort of maximize the physicality of your squad for a game like Nottingham Forest, you're thinking to yourself, well, maybe this is a game where we leave one of those guys or 2 of those guys on the bench and sort of ease them back in, give them 20, 30 minutes if we need to. But when you come back, Havertz is on the bench and Jesus starts up front in this Nottingham Forest game.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of sides to this. I can remember watching Jesus play at Chelsea in the game when Gabriel scored me on 1-0. Andrew, I was at the game. He was fantastic. I mean, literally everywhere. And Aubameyang was playing on the other side, and I was thinking, "Oh, we've lucked out here. Look at us. We're looking great. We got the best number 9 in the league." And then I looked at the player that came on at the weekend, and he was a different player. Now, to be honest, we all pick teams in our minds. It would be pre-game, and I had a little inkling that he might even start the Chelsea game. You know, and I thought pitch he likes, quite a tight pitch, lots of small space dribbling abilities required in wide areas. I thought, you know what, maybe he should start this game. They're going to push onto us, press onto us. You go over the press into him. He can hold at left-hand side. Maybe use him for the first phase of the game and bring him out earlier late on. So in my mind, I'm trying to find ways to get him in. You know, I am, because I want him to do well. But when he comes on and plays, I think to myself, God, I'm glad I didn't say that in public, even though I just did. I'm glad I didn't say that in public.
After the fact, it's all right.
And because he can't trap it, he can't hold it, running into cul-de-sacs. I think, that looks silly now. And maybe that's what the manager sees. He sees them every single day. He's watching them train. And if you're not beating the young right backs in from the academy, then he's not going to play you. You know, and so we have to trust. And when I see some although I thought Martinelli had a iffy defensive game this weekend, but I see how defensively he's trusted. I see what he gives us. I'm thinking, yeah, I see when the manager started him. You know, I see when the manager started Kai Havertz. You know, I can see his selections, and I can't argue with them. So it's up to these players when they do come in. And to be fair to Trossard, even though he's been a bit 50-50 this season, he has forced the manager's hand on occasions to play him. You know, he's done it exactly right. You know, and so yeah, that's what you need, more of Trossard, even though I have issues with him. That's a separate podcast. But you need more of that type of, I'm going to make sure you see me and I'm going to execute, I'm going to score, then I'm going to make your decisions harder. You know, Jesus isn't doing that at the moment, and that's why I think we have a problem. All
right, I'm going to ask you then, what's your issue with Trossard? What is the thing that's frustrating you, I guess, about his game this season?
I think there's a lot of similarities, actually. For me, it's like what you're going to get and when you're going to get it. I mean, sometimes Trossard's unbelievable. Oh my gosh, he's got to start next game. Starts next game, can't find him. I think he's had some incidents this year with the sendings off and the Saliba sending off that have not been great. Comes on at the weekend, Andrew, I watched the game again. Mate, he was smooth in that game. Fantastic. And that lovely pass into Odegaard was just incredible. Runs onto it, then misses the next moment. It's with Jesus. I like the idea of him, but where's he going to be when we're trying to build up? Where's he going to be? Can he hold it? Is he going to be left? Is he going to be right? Is he going to be playing left back? Where's he going to be? How can you get some continuity and certainty of play if you don't know what someone's going to do and you don't know where they're going to be? And can they hold the ball to allow ball progression? Then you see Martin Odegaard coming to the team and the ball goes to his feet, and guess what? He holds it. He waits for the run. Then he passes it. And this type of certainty is so important to allowing us to move up the pitch.
Sure.
So important to where the territory by which we're playing. So for me, that's my main issues, mate.
Is for example, you say Odegaard. I mean, is that in some part at least, just to play devil's advocate, down to the clear definition of his role? Whereas I think with Trossard, maybe even Havertz a little bit this season, it's been a bit mixed. We haven't been quite sure exactly what they've been asked to do. Sometimes Havertz was over in those Odegaard positions, and you're like, I can sort of see why, but that's not who he is. That's not where he's best. That's not where he's most comfortable. I think what's great about Havertz is he will clearly do anything that you want him to do. If you're a manager, you're a coach, and you're asking him, will you do this? He'll, sure. I'll give it like 100%. I might not be brilliant at it, but I'll give you 100% in doing it.
Yeah.
But I think with Odegaard, there is a clearly defined role and position, an area of the pitch in which he operates best. And I don't mean to say that's not the only place he can operate. You know, we know he can move around. We know he can find those passes on the left-hand side as easily as from the right-hand side. But maybe with those other two players, that lack of definition or that lack of clarity might have played a part.
On occasion, some of that's tactically. For example, Havertz and Newcastle, Andrew, if you remember, there's a couple of times he did overlaps behind Saka, and we're all thinking, mate, get in the middle.
Yeah.
But manager's thinking, you know what, they've got Joel Linton, Joe Willock, Lewis Hall on that side.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to triple up on Saka. I need someone to move him because we're not fit at the fullback situation. So I need someone to move. So I'm going to get Kai out the middle to move them around. So we get Saka to come inside. Didn't work. We changed it after half time.
Mm-hmm.
You can say lack of clarity or a failed tactical solution. I will say there are basics in the game, just about retaining the ball.
Yeah.
When you win it, keep it. I don't think those players are retaining the ball well enough. I also feel with Odegaard, he literally, Andrew, bends the game to his will. He gets the ball and he moves it, and then he goes and gets it again with total confidence. And people can say, if they can say, well, look, he's free to do that time. Well, mate, sometimes he just wants to dominate the game and move people and say, you're not going to stay with me. I'm going to run you off your feet. And I'm going to get it again. I'm going to control the play. I'm going to turn away from you. And we go out the other side. Then you have to decide if you're going to follow me. I'll tell you what you're going to end up doing. You end up standing in your 4-4-2 block. That's what you're going to end up doing because you can't stay with me.
Yeah.
You know, and so he forces the game. He forces the game to his will and he dominates his opponent. And so, okay, he's a high quality player. He's hard to miss, right? But we need a little bit more basics from some of the players that we're questioning. Just hold the ball. Just do that. You know, we can play. And then we can play from that position.
Yeah. All right. Well, look, we'll see what kind of improvements we get after this international break. I just did want to ask you about the big off-the-pitch story this week, and that was David Coote and the video and maybe more than one video. Without getting into the nuts and bolts of that specifically,
yep.
To what extent do you think this is an issue that PGMOL need to address in a very serious way? Because I think it really does kind of undermine the organization. It has an impact not just on David Coote or what people think about his abilities as a referee, but all the other referees by extension. I think that's just normal because we all know they exist under this umbrella organization run by Howard Webb. And I don't think, generally speaking, they've been aware enough of the optics of things that they do. So I don't want to delve into conspiracy and Michael Oliver going to referee in the UAE or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. Even if that is completely innocent, the optics of it are terrible.
Yeah.
And I think more and more we're having to deal with referees, and there's maybe a wider conversation to be had about why that is, from Howard Webb to media outlets who see it as a very easy way to make content that people will engage with, or, you know, to put it another way, drive people fucking mental. So they'll, you know, go crazy on social media and stuff like that. But as a sort of line in the sand kind of moment for PGMOL and for the Premier League, because I think the Premier League have to be aware of how this impacts the product, for want of a better word, of the Premier League itself.
Yeah, Andrew, I think this is a moment where we need to really think about what we're doing with the PGMOL. I mean, as an organisation, I think they're dysfunctional. Right? You look at any organisation, there are key things within it that if you're running a group like that, you need to look at your people, your processes, how you manage change, how you introduce technology, how you develop people, how you broaden your referee pool. They are failing on every aspect of any sort of organisational excellence strategy. They are failing. Their people are the same people and not turned over enough, right? So you're going to get the same type of people making the same type of mistakes. They haven't embraced technology in the right way, right? They haven't done it. They're trying to have separate rules for what happened in UEFA and have different paths, but they're just confusing people. You know, and you get a situation where, honestly, there seems to be a difference in strategy. You have the head in Howard Webb that seems to be almost driving referees to be personalities.
Yeah.
And Andrew, I don't think they are built for this. They are built to be silent officials, some of them. They are not ready for the light to be shining on them like this. You know, they need support. I genuinely worry about them, you know, as a group of human beings. I worry about them and the stresses that they're under, because we have no game without them. Forget about this decisions that we all can rewind and call up. Let's forget about that. Any club's going to find a decision that they didn't like. Let's try to be a bit broader and a bit more adult about it. these guys are under serious pressure and their management not helping them. And who is overseeing this organisation? Who is overseeing how they arrive at certain decisions? Where are their measures? Where are their measures to show who is successful, who isn't? And why is that not transparent? Who decides what referee should referee what game, and what is that decision based on? Is it data driven, or is it come from the gut? They are an organisation which is dysfunctional, and they need oversight. They need auditing, people to look at what they're doing, because they're failing. They are literally failing, and they need a broader structure around them, and they need better support, you know? And I don't think the current leadership has recognised what's happening to the game as a whole. As a whole, every other aspect of football is improving. Anything you want to mention. The pitches, the stadiums, the sports science, the strength and condition, everything, Andrew, everything is improving. The globalisation of coaching standards. I mean, it's incredible, the coaching now. You can watch any team from lower leagues and all building up from the back, all trying to play. Everyone's trying to do things in a better way. You know what's not changed? Is that before that video of David Coote, I could almost tell you what he's going to sound like. He was going to be a guy from up north. And when I heard his voice, I thought, that's how I thought you'd sound. And, you know, without knowing where he lived, we need to broaden the pool so we get better quality people in the organisation. We need to do this. You know, it's very important. If we have to go abroad to get referees, fine. We've done it in every other aspect of the game. Yeah, and that has driven everything up.
That's right? The mad thing about this is that the Premier League is watched all over the world, played by players from all over the world, managed and coached by men from all over the world. And the referee pool is, with no offence to anybody from that part of the world, it's the northwest of England. Yeah. It's Lancashire and Yorkshire and Greater Manchester and Cheshire and places like that. And it's so at odds with what the Premier League is right now that I think it is a problem. It's a problem for the league. And I think the sort of faux transparency we get from a Howard Webb TV show when all the Ref Watch segments are basically referees agreeing with the decisions that referees have made, even if it's completely the opposite of what they've said about a similar situation in the past. It doesn't matter. There's no consistency. So as fans, we can see that what we're being spoon-fed is nonsense. It's garbage. We can see that. Football fans are not stupid. I mean, some of us are. I'm not saying everyone is fucking Einstein or anything like that, but let's also realize that football fans understand the game and they understand their clubs and they understand what happens and what they're seeing. And despite the fact people are trying to tell you, this is not where you can't gaslight the majority of people the way they have tried to.
No, you can't. And we've all got memories and we've all got ability to read certain messages online that tells us what's happened in other clubs. We've got transparency across the game, and we can see we've got far more information than we did have 15 years ago. And so they need to go with the times, and they just haven't. They've just secured career roles for them. There's only a few of them that referee in the Premier League, just 20 plus. Today, if you're one of 20 in the country, you're bound to feel elite, aren't you? You're bound to feel like, well, you need me. Well, this doesn't work. Yeah. And this is what I'm going to do. You know, you're bound to have those things. Who oversees them? Who controls them? Broaden it out. Bring more competition in. Get people on their toes again. In any walk of life, competition breeds performance. What's different about these guys? They make it so hard to get there. When you get there, they're protected. Yeah. They protect each other. It doesn't feel right to me. It does not feel right to me. And from that basis, you are now challenging people's ability to trust them. And once you do that, you're back to where you started, Andrew. It's about optics. And once you have the bad optics, it doesn't really matter anymore, does it? No. You have a problem.
Big problem and a big challenge in trying to, turn things around. Like, you're never going to convince 100% of the people 100% of the time about referees. Just not going to happen. And referees are not going to get 100% of the decisions right 100% of the time. But I think if people at least believe there's a good faith to what's going on.
Yeah.
And things like we've seen this week completely undermine that. It is a huge challenge for PGMOL and maybe more for the Premier League to have a strong think about how referees are managed, for this global product that is, supposedly the best league in the world, but we're not getting the best referees in the world. That's for sure. All right, listen, we better leave it there as ever. Clive, a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed to Clive. You can find him alongside many other good Arsenal people over on Blue Sky. That's been a bit of a regrouping, I think you would say. So he is there at Clive PAFC, at Clive PAFC. And of course, you can find Arseblog and all the other Arseblog crew members over on Blue Sky as well. You can find the app in the various app stores or just go on the web. It is bsky.app with 2 P's, bsky.app. Okay, with me now on the Arsecast, delighted to welcome back. He's an Arsenal fan, he's an author, and he's got a brand new book out called Go to War, Football on the Brink in the 80s. It's Jon Spurling. Hello, John.
Hi, Andrew. Thanks for having me on.
My pleasure. What number is this now? You're like a book machine.
This is, number, I was counting on my shelf. Number 8. Number 8 this is now.
Okay, and this is sort of follow-up to when you did about football in the 70s and football in the 80s. I think we're, more or less the same age and grew up around the same influences, albeit experiencing them in slightly different ways. You were over there and I was in Ireland. I thought this was, just to sort of lay it out, there's various chapters, people can dip in and out. It's not like one big thing all the way through, but it comes, it captures many of the things and many of the issues that football was dealing with in the 1980s. Look, it goes without saying, things were different in the 80s compared to today, and not just in terms of football. But what I found fascinating were some of the themes that we are still dealing with in this day and age were present and prevalent there. And very early in the book, you cite a Times article describing football as a slum sport played in slum stadiums and increasingly watched by slum people who deter decent folk from turning up. And even now, you get the sense that sometimes that attitude towards football and football fans is still so ingrained in the way football stories are presented and football coverage is what we have to deal with.
Yeah, that's right. It's as you say, the 80s. It was football was regarded in a very different way to now. Football was in a recession, if you like, in the 80s. There was an economic recession anyway, and football and the state of the economy tend to kind of go hand in hand. So crowds were falling. And hooliganism, was rife. But what I've tried to do in the book is to look at what life was like, both playing football through various footballers that I spoke to, what it was like to write about football and what it was like to watch football in those days. But I think you're right. There is still that lingering feeling about footballers and football fans that it is somewhat of the lower order at times. Football has changed out of all recognition, and yet you still hear sort of sometimes the voice of Middle England describing football fans as football yobbos. Yeah. They've not really shaken off that reputation, although, as we know, at Arsenal by the end of the 80s with the fizzing fanzine movement at Arsenal with the Gooner and the Echo and that kind of thing, football fans are generally good people. And that football at its best can be a great thing, but there was a danger, I think, at that era that football was falling into terminal decline, and actually that sports like snooker and darts were regarded as far more family friendly, and were actually starting to rack up higher TV audiences than football.
Sure, there were clearly societal issues at play, in the 1980s, as you said. Economically, and this is not just true of England, but certainly in many places, the world was in recession. There was high unemployment, high disenfranchisement with governments. And football was a sport, while extremely popular. I'm not going to say it had been let go to rack and ruin, but certainly there wasn't investment in facilities. There wasn't investment in the fan experience in any way. And look, you know, I'm sure there'll be people listening to this going, I wish it was still the 80s. Football was better back then. You could just turn up and, you know, I get that. I completely get that. But I think as a fan experience, it's a lot more comfortable now. And, you know, I do wonder if, you know, fans in the 80s who are young men would still fancy going to experience the same sort of climate of look, poor stadiums, poor facilities, violence, treated terribly by police, looked down on by many people. Yeah. But it was in many ways a reflection of the society in which the sport existed.
That's right. I mean, it's interesting you mention that, because the infrastructure in football had been, to be honest, rotten for a long time. I mean, the disasters that happened in the 80s, like Heysel, the Bradford Fire, could have easily happened in the 70s or the 60s. It was just happened to be coincidence that they kind of converged during that period. And yet, oddly, as you kind of suggest, there is some nostalgia still for the game in the 80s. I think probably it's because football was more in its place then. It wasn't ubiquitous like it is now, when anyone can be a fan. You know, it was still broadly the working man's game. Yeah. It was still affordable to turn up. Stadia were kind of generally located in the middle of communities, whereas now they're kind of more out of town. You know, there's no mention of sports washing or VAR. So, yeah, there is that kind of feeling that perhaps football's lost its edginess at the top level, and there is some sentimentality for that from people of our age or older. And yet, you know, it shouldn't be the case, should it, that people go to watch football and end up not coming home due to you know, terrible events at games. So you've got to kind of balance it out that way. For sure.
I mean, and look, the 80s I think was punctuated by terrible events in football. You know, the 80s finished more or less with what happened at Hillsborough, and 97 people lost their lives there. You mentioned the Bradford Fire, which was an unbelievable thing to witness. And I remember looking at the TV footage, and I'm sure you did at the time, just thinking, my God, what is happening here? The Heysel disaster.
And then on the same day as Bradford Fire, of course, you had the riot at St Andrews with Leeds and Birmingham fans, where a young boy at his first game sought sanctuary from it, tucked himself behind a wall. The wall fell on him and he died, Ian Hambridge, on the same day as, you know, the Bradford Fire. So, and then you had Heysel, what was it, 2 weeks later? I mean, football did have a death wish, really. And that was the same year, I think it was 2 months after the notorious riot at Kenilworth Road during the Luton Millwall FA Cup match. So something had to change. And it did.
Well, it did, obviously, but the effect on English football and English football clubs was profound as well, particularly after Heysel, where a very hardline approach was taken by government, by Margaret Thatcher and her government, about who was going to pay the price for this, for the violence. And you know, just sort of to put it in context, that, you know, Liverpool were in the European Cup final that year. There was an incident or incidents in the previous year's European Cup final where fans of Liverpool and I think Roma, you know, there were clashes, and there was this sort of, well, the Italians and the English fans are going to go at it, and the violence there and the sort of combination of violence plus the crumbling infrastructure of that stadium cost many people their lives. And it cost English clubs, not just Liverpool, but all English clubs, participation in European competition for many years.
That's right. I mean, the first part of the 80s was a time of huge success for English clubs in Europe. You had Aston Villa, Forest, Liverpool winning the European Cup, Tottenham and Ipswich the UEFA Cup, and Everton the Cup Winners' Cup. And that is brought to, you know, an abrupt stop. And as you say, the 1985 European Cup final between Liverpool and Juventus, the seeds are sown the year before when Liverpool played Roma in Rome. There was a lot of trouble after the game, and it was almost it didn't surprise anybody, to be honest, that the Heysel disaster happened because of the recriminations from the following year. Liverpool were after revenge, I think, against, or some fans against any Italians. It was that kind of toxic environment, and of course the Heysel Stadium itself wasn't fit for purpose, as Liverpool chief executive Peter Robinson said. But it's almost like an inevitable conclusion of the toxic masculinity, the cheap alcohol, the inadequate policing, the poor infrastructure crystallised in that one night at Heysel. And then afterwards, of course, English clubs go into a kind of six-year exile after the ban, which Margaret Thatcher kind of supported wholeheartely, went through. I mean, Kenny Dalglish was of the opinion that it was unfair, that Liverpool perhaps deserved the ban. But as he said, if she'd not kind of said so much about it, the others might not have been banned. It might just have been Liverpool. But that was the nature of the time.
I don't want to paint this book as something miserable, by the way, because, what you do is you look at football across the 1980s, and while there were obviously significant problems, thankfully, that have been fixed for the most part, football in the 80s was... you look at it and there were characters and there were incredible things like you just mentioned Forest and Aston Villa, for example. Nottingham Forest won the European Cup in 1979, but won it again. A club like Nottingham Forest to be able to go and do that. Aston Villa won the European Cup. Yeah. And there were people in the game who were, I think, larger than life. It sort of reminds me a little bit of tennis in a way, where the more professional the game got, the fewer characters you had in the game. So tennis in the 80s, and you had your McEnroes and you had your Jimmy Connors and Ilie Nastase and these sort of maverick type people in the game. But as it got more professional, the athletes got more serious, and maybe some of that aspect of it went by the wayside. Here you have managers, players, chairmen of football clubs who, by any normal standards, are like way out there, completely out there. I think it was I think it was the England manager Ron Greenwood, after England won a World Cup game or a European Championship game 2-0, told his players, go out and get drunk. And that was their celebration. And that is so at odds with how we experience the game now, because it's not the right way to do it, but back then that was how things operated.
There was a massive drinking culture in the 80s amongst footballers at every single club. I mean, Arsenal had their Tuesday club, didn't they, as we know, with, Merson and Adams, which impacted on their lives moving forward. But every club, when you talk to Arsenal players of that era, they bump into Charlton players or QPR or Tottenham players. They were all out there. And it was, we're writing about something 40 plus years ago. It was a different world. I mean, you talk about the characters. I mean, I wrote about Malcolm Allison, who was the Manchester City boss, kind of like a bit of a Vitas Gerolaitis character. We're talking about early 80s tennis players there, with his fedora, with his gambling, love of casinos, and obviously almost, sending Manchester City over the edge with spending copious amounts of money on Steve Daly and Kevin Reeves, £1 million here, £1 million there, which almost, tipped City over the edge. And, what he's trying to do is keep up with Manchester United, whereas what he should have done is developed his own kind of youth products, and perhaps then Manchester City's future in the 80s would have turned out differently. But I mean, it is a very, very different game then. It's much more of an aerial game. So, central defenders like Terry Butcher, the Oxford duo of Malcolm Shotton and Gary Briggs, people might remember them with their tashes and their bullet guy haircuts there. They were tough. And of course, the whole thing was the weekly clash with strikers like Mick Harford of Luton or Graham Sharp of Everton or, Alan Smith of Leicester, then Arsenal. It's a much more combative kind of aerial game. Not always amazing on the eye when you watch it now, not like it is today, but nonetheless, that was the era in which they were brought up on. You have skillful wingers like John Barnes, like Chris Waddle, like David Moss at Luton, whose job was to put the ball on a sixpence on the head of their striker. It was done that way. There's a lot more kind of long ball or long passing, as Graham Taylor insisted it was. And it's a different era in terms of style, certainly.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the bit about the Hull City chairman, who in 1981 said that the Tigers would be the first club to play football on the moon. And so his plan was to sort of meet and greet fans, give out champagne. He outlined his grandiose plans for Boothbury Park. He wanted to turn it into an entertainment bowl that would host pop concerts and had a hotel/gymnasium complex, which in the context of today's football is quite forward thinking. I mean, it's absurd maybe that this was happening at Hull City and Boothbury Park. I remember when we lived there in England, my dad took me to some games. It would have been 1980, 81, going to Boothbury Park. The idea that this stadium could be anything other than like not even half empty. They had a goalkeeper called Tony Norman. He was a Welsh goalkeeper. But you could hear him in the stand. You're sitting in the stand. The stadium is so empty, and you can just hear this man swearing his head off. Very creative, very educational for a young guy like me. But, it's this idea that you could turn that venue into something grandiose when literally you can hear the goalkeeper above whatever din there is from the fans was absolutely hilarious to me.
The only thing he did achieve, isn't he, is push through the sales of Tiger Cola, which was a thing.
Right.
And they did sell several 1,000 cans of that. Did you ever touch any? No,
I don't remember. Anyway, I don't remember. It might explain some ongoing health issues I have if I did. I don't know, but
but I think what's interesting is, I mean, you mentioned the guy at Hull, but I think that football chairmen are under more pressure to get their clubs to make money. Because there's less money coming in. So what happens is the chairman at the bigger clubs like Martin Edwards at United, Irving Scholar at Tottenham and David Dean at Arsenal, although he was vice chairman, what they're trying to do is the bigger chairman, they want a bigger slice of the pie. So by the mid-80s, the seeds of the Premier League are already being put into place. They want to change the archaic voting structure where each of the 92 clubs, the votes were equal. Every team got equal money from TV, and the big five, if you like, change it so they get bigger slice.
Sure.
And they're also looking to how they can get more money out of TV, because really TV deals in the mid 80s were laughably low. And there was a cartel between the BBC and ITV. It's not until later in the 80s that B Sky B even appears on the horizon. So things are starting to change, but it's hard to see it at that time because of the nature of the decade it is.
Yeah. I mean, that does come to pass, obviously, the change and the American influence. And there's an interesting bit about, players from the old First Division going to play in America. George Best, obviously, Dennis Stewart. I thought it was fascinating to consider the idea that Trevor Francis, who was the first £1 million footballer in England, was allowed in the summer months to go and play for Detroit Express in the NASL. It was very lucrative for him. He earned £100,000 or something. But can you imagine now, the idea that, okay, it's the off season, not that there is an off season anymore, but like Bukayo Saka being allowed to go and play for another club for a couple of months just to sort of earn a few extra quid. That really does highlight the differences in how the game was back then, how professional it was and what was expected of players and what they were permitted to do, I guess, by clubs as well.
Yeah, I think so. I think Trevor Francis is probably the first what we call modern footballer, in the sense that he was very, very wealthy. He earned a great deal of money from his spell in the USA, as well as his lucrative contract at Nottingham Forest. And there's a great bit in there where Francis said that Brian Clough turned up one Sunday morning, had a look at his lovely house in, is it Newark-on-Trent, I think it was, a very nice part outside Nottingham. And he wagged his finger and he said, I can't do a Clough accent, I'm afraid. But he said, you play for Nottingham Forest, you got a lovely house, do not take your eye off the ball or you'll be out of this club. And I think that Clough's almost saying that he's not used to having gilded footballers like that on his hands. At 24, Francis was made. He was sorted. He was financially secure, and he's the first footballer, I think, in England to really be in that position. Even more so than probably Kenny Dalglish at Liverpool, or someone like that. I think Francis is the first of what you would call the modern football.
Well, he went abroad as well. That's the thing that Dalglish never did. I mean, there's fascinating stuff in there about players going to Italy. Francis was one of those. Kevin Keegan, of course, who chose not to go to Italy but went to Hamburg instead. And it seems sort of mad now that a really high-profile player from England would go to a high-profile English player. I was going to say would go to Germany, but then I've just remembered Harry Kane. But then I guess, there are levels to this stuff.
There are. I think Keegan was a bit younger at that point when he went. In fact, I should say that. Keegan and Francis, actually. Keegan was also made by the time, his contract at Hamburg he was earning so much more than he did in England from all his endorsements. And that is a kind of portent of things to come from many English footballers, I think. Mm-hmm.
There's obviously... there are things in the 80s going back to some of the things that aren't great, and there are issues for black players up and down the country, and even representing England when they were called up to England. And this passage where an FA representative spoke to Bobby Robson and said, "There's a few black lads in the squad there, Bobby. Make sure they don't take over." And Bobby Robson said, "If they're good players, the colour of their skin is irrelevant." Yeah. I know we've come some distance since then, but those attitudes from people who sort of saw themselves as gatekeepers of the game of football in the FA and other positions of authority were really, really deeply ingrained, weren't they?
They were. I mean, Bobby Robson gave debuts to players like Luther Blissett, Ricky Hill, who was at Luton, Mark Chamberlain at Stoke. And, the abuse that they received. I mean, very famously, Cyril Regis, who was first capped by Ron Greenwood, got a bullet through the post. But Luther Blissett received a letter saying, "Pull on the white shirt again and we'll kill you." And there was nowhere for these guys to go. I said to Luther Blissett, "Could you not have gone to the police?" And I said, "Well, what are they going to do?" They wouldn't have done anything at the time. And really, I think that, that attitude perhaps slowly improves during the 80s, but not particularly in many cases. And one of the later chapters focuses on the fact that at Sunderland, a fellow called Jed Greby, he got very involved after two Sunderland players, Howard Gale and Gary Bennett, was sent off during a game with Newcastle when the whole of St James's Park were the abuse, the white noise pouring down was awful, and as a result, it sent sow the seeds, if you like, of show racism, the red card, which is obviously key now. But Bobby Robson's main regret is that as England manager, he was unable to change that narrative. He felt that from when he took over in 1982 to when he left in 1990, really the prevailing attitude towards black players from fans hadn't changed that much. I think at Arsenal we were fortunate in the fact not just we had many black players in the team, but I think that the incidents of Arsenal fans being abusive to black players were, in my experience anyway, minimal. But I don't think that was the case, at all clubs.
No. And like I said, there are sort of parallels with things that are going on these days, and trying to change certain attitudes both on and off the pitch is still a challenge for football, for black players.
The lack of black managers, the lack of any black representation in the boardroom, that hasn't changed, and that's a battle that still needs to be fought. For
sure. The other just final thing I want to talk to you about, because I don't want to give too much away, and this book is there's brilliant stuff on Brian Clough and Peter Taylor, and Clough, as you would imagine, is good value in your stories. But fanzines, I think is a really interesting area just to have a quick chat about, because obviously it was the precursor to what we do now, whether it's in websites or blogs or anything like that. But the fanzine culture that sparked in the 80s, is a really interesting aspect of fan culture, and it still exists to this day. And some of those fanzines still exist to this day, albeit perhaps in different formats. But that spark of creativity in the 80s was really fun.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's an example of me trying to, look at the positives here, because I do believe, as you might expect, that football was very much a sport worth saving. But I think that there were, football fans by the mid-80s, they had a terrible reputation. It was of knuckle scraping filth in some in some people's eyes. And the fanzine editors that I spoke to, like for instance Andy Mitten, who's still editor of United We Stand Now, and you've got for instance Andy Lyons at When Saturday Comes. They wanted to say that football fans are not I'm not a hooligan, and actually we can be articulate and we genuinely care about the sport. Yeah. And so in the wake of all the disasters of the mid-80s, what comes is the outpouring of fanzines. And it kind of ties in, I think, really, with the existential threats to football from, for instance, the Thatcher government, with the proposed ID card scheme as well. Some football fans get mobilised on that. And with the advent of cheaper home computers and easier printing, the fanzine boom is born. And by the end of the 80s, you had 200 or 300 fanzines being sold outside the games. You might remember sports pages on Charing Cross Road as well, which played a major part in that. And I think it's kind of a very, very positive way to show that many fans were on board, and that things could improve. You also had the inflatables craze as well. Oh, yeah. It didn't take off as much at Arsenal as it did at other clubs. I remember the odd banana there, but I think that was another sign that actually going to football could be fun. Yeah. On what were largely grey monochrome terraces in the era before replica shirts and retro shirts and that kind of thing. That it was a sign that hopefully in the future, fans would play a much more involved role in the game, and that actually going to games could be enjoyable.
What about
wasn't always?
No, for sure. And look, things obviously changed in the early 90s with the Premier League and all-seater stadiums and those kinds of things. But just finally on the fanzines, the other thing is it gave fans a voice, and it also allowed fans to form communities that maybe they hadn't been able to form before. There are always groups and stuff like that, but this idea that you could have a voice, there are a lot of people, a lot of professional writers now who started life writing for fanzines for their clubs and have moved on.
Amy Lawrence, for instance,
a brilliant example with the Gunner,
Yeah, Nick Hornby started the same way, and that is the case with fanzine writers across the board. And I think that what it does is it almost sets up, particularly with When Saturday Comes, a new template for football writing. Yeah. So football writing before had been very kind of two-dimensional, cliched, hackneyed, that sort of thing.
Well, it was tabloid, wasn't it? And you'd have like your sort of the guys who are a little, I don't want to say above it, but the people like Brian Glanville, for example, as these sort of color piece writers, who had these wonderful way with words, and then you had your sort of meat and drink football reporting and match reports and those kinds of things.
That's right. But I mean, that Brian Glanville isn't kind of like a reflection of most football writers.
No, absolutely,
is the exception to the rule. And I think that what the fanzines do is take a more critical eye on authorities and on the government, which hadn't necessarily been in place before. And it sets that template for football writing and analysis. And I think you're right what you said earlier. Without the fanzines, you and I probably, we wouldn't be having this conversation now. Yeah. I wouldn't be doing the writing that I do either. So it is a ray of light, I think, at the end of what was, a very, very difficult decade for football.
There are so many chapters in this book and so many really interesting stories. And, you know, we didn't even mention somebody like Robert Maxwell. You know, I mean, that'll tell you what's in this book for people. So I really, really do recommend it. And of course, there is a very good chapter on the Arsenal towards the end and the end of the 80s. In 1989, there was a very, very pleasing...
Arsenal fans, it ends well.
It definitely ends well. So make sure you get your hands on a copy. We've got a couple to give away. We'll give you a question about that in a minute, but we'll leave it there. Jon, as ever, thanks very much and good luck with the book.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me on. Cheers.
Thank you so much to Jon. The book is called Go to War. Little reference there to Frankie Goes to Hollywood, of course. Their big song, Two Tribes. Go to War, football on the brink in the 1980s. As I said, we do have a couple of signed copies to give away. All you need to do is answer this very, very simple question. George Graham was the manager of Arsenal in 1989 when we went to Anfield and beat Liverpool and won the old First Division for the first time since 1971. Now, George, of course, was known as a very strict manager. What he said went. I was going to say goad, but goad is a completely different word. What he said, goad. No, but what George said, that was gospel. That was it. Nobody dared argue with George, really. So he was a hard taskmaster, but that was at odds with George Graham, the footballer. They were two different characters. George, the player, who was part of that 1971 double-winning team, of course, and George, the manager. When he was a player, he had a nickname. What was that nickname? Was it A, Stroller, B, Strider, or C, Boy George? All you have to do is pick the right answer, A, B, or C. Email it to me, please, at competition@arseblog.com. That is competition@arseblog.com. Next week, the random number generator will pick out two winners. I'll announce them on next week's Arsecast, and we will get those books sent out to you. In the meantime, if you'd like to buy a copy of the book, it is out now. It's published by Bite Back Publishing, and you can get it from your local independent bookstore, who will, of course, be very happy to order it in for you if they don't have it in stock. You can also follow a link in the show notes to hive.co.uk. You can buy it directly from there. And they also help support local independent bookshops. So if you want to get it from that link, do so. If you want to get it from your local independent bookstore, please do so. Support your local economy and not tax-dodging, space helmet, billionaire twat bastards. That's my philosophy on book buying. Right, I'm going to leave it there for today. Thank you so much, as always, for being here. Hope you enjoyed the show. If you'd like to give us a review, please do so in the podcast app of your choice. We're always very grateful to receive your 5-star reviews. If you have the time to do that, it would be much appreciated. If not, don't worry about it. We will be here on Monday with an Arsecast Extra for you. So until then, have a great weekend, and we will catch you on the next one. Until then, cheers. Bye-bye. It's the latest development in football fanzines. It's audio in your ears on your Walkman with me, Chris Cassette. On your TDK C90 this week, we look at referees. Are they good or are they not good? We also have a feature on the club's star striker. How long will his goal drought last? Hopefully not long. And we talk to a young fan who gets very cross when his team doesn't win. Here's a snippet. Everything is shit! So it's real to really good. This'll never catch on.